NYC VIBE was invited to drive up to the Catskills to explore the one-day festival which paid tribute to the legacy of the Borscht Belt. The well-known name for the once large hotels and resorts with bungalow colonies in parts of Sullivan, Ulster and Orange counties that catered mostly to Jewish families, which influenced modern American culture.
Funny is funny, they say, and I think funny very much started up here. The era that this was here in the Catskill Mountains, it lasted for so long, and it's part of our DNA in a way, and it's also part of the DNA of the whole culture, and I mean the whole culture, the American culture of comedy.
Starting in the 1900s up through the 1970s, Route 17, also known as the Quickway, was jam-packed starting in late June when New York City Jews made their exodus from the crowded and hot city to the Catskill Mountains. Named after the Ashkenazi beet soup, the Borscht Belt attracted guests upstate for leisure, Yiddish culture, food, and of course, entertainment.
What's known as the Borscht Belt comedy started where all of the punchlines were in Yiddish, and the big joke was we could follow it up to a certain point, but then the punchlines were in Yiddish, and you learn to appreciate it. I go to comedy clubs now, and you can see the influence, you can see the pacing, you can see the development from starting with jokes that were a little bit more like vaudeville with punchlines to going to observational humor, and it all stems from that.
I was walking around earlier. You guys are like city people, except you're not too cool. A lot of glasses wearers here. It's like there's something in the water. And I think it's astigmatism.
Me and my dad get along now. We're both adults. I'm now in my advanced 20s. I'm 42.
Of course, Jews also came to the Catskills because they were barred from vacationing at many other popular locales. And therefore, they created a vacationland of their own, packing Jewish-owned resorts like Grossinger's, Kutcher's, and the Concord, amongst many others. At the area's height in the 1950s, there were over 500 hotels and 50,000 bungalow colonies in Sullivan and Ulster counties alone.
The comedians back then, especially the Jewish comedians, they had a shtick that nobody else had, so people loved it. I saw Jackie Mason at the Browns, so a lot of good memories with the, comedians.
Jackie Mason, he was our opening act. When we opened up on Memorial Weekend in 1958, was our opening act, and we had Rodney Dangerfield, Mal Lawrence.
The Catskills was a great place because this is where people would get their training and their skills. So a lot of the comedians could come here to work out their kinks and get themselves to where they became better and better comedians. And this was the place where they had all the opportunities to work steady and work it out until they became who they became.
They all started in the Catskills. They all came, they all did their 3 shows, all running around from place to place. The jokes were clean, the acts were clean, and they were funny, and they were hilarious. Many of these comedians went on to do Catskills on Broadway in Manhattan. And it was, they were famous at that point. And it was in great demand, and people were flocking to the theaters to see the people that they saw in the 50s and 60s at the Borscht Belt, and it was fantastic.
Comedy traces back to the Borscht Belt today, more so than it did, let's say even 30, 40 years ago. I think that there is a sign of respect and a comfort as to where we come from. Alex Edelman, Seinfeld, Elon Gold, they recognize they are who they are. And comedy is comedy.
I think about the Borscht Belt a lot because on one hand, it's this extremely influential comedy movement by Jews for Jews for the most part. And on the other hand, I sometimes am saddened by the fact that I worry that their influence has waned. And I wonder where the sort of like young Jewish comedians talking about what it means to be Jewish are. There are a couple and they're fantastic. And hopefully this museum and hopefully this festival will start to change that a little bit.
To go back there and perform in the Catskills, it's nostalgic and it's amazing. You feel like you're a part of this brotherhood that started generations ago. Jackie Mason, all those guys that started out there, you're talking about legends. First of all, it makes me nauseous that some person such as yourself would even invoke my name. This is a nauseating thing. Leave me alone, let me rest in peace. The last thing I want to do is hear my name out of your mouth. This is disgusting.
These summers in the New York mountains shaped American Jewish culture, enabling Jews to become more American, while at the same time introducing the American public to immigrant Jewish culture. By the late 1960s, however, with the rise of air travel, the lure of Catskills started to fade. By the mid-1980s, most of the hotels and resorts closed. But for the comedians, they had new and more opportunities to reach their audience.
At the time, you didn't think about it that it's going to be over at one time. But looking back, it's great having something like this today. The internet really made people just tell their story and saying, I worked here, it was the greatest time of my life. And they remember that from 50 years ago, no matter how old they are. So that was just a wonderful thing.
It was a time of great joy and innocence, and for the camaraderie and the people and the dancing and just the fun. We waited a long time for a museum, and it's wonderful because we have lots of memorabilia that we'd like to loan or donate, and for people to relive it, and hopefully for the younger people to see that here's Jewish history in a really positive way.
And so, to know where we are and possibly heading, we now know how we got here.